on every issue, particularly if it's contemporary in nature, it would require an element of ijtihad. If it is contemporary, it means by definition, it's not clearly stated in the Quran or in the Sunnah. In other words, it's not something the Sahaba met. So you couldn't have an early consensus on a contemporary issue. So when you say photography, when you say democracy or voting, when you say organ transplant or elections, when you touch on so many issues that you know these were not there at the time of the Prophet and Sahaba, it means you most likely do not have clear texts of the Quran and the Sunnah handling that whole issue. So scholars need to do ijtihad. Now there are various tools of ijtihad that the scholars would use. They would look at qiyas, drawing by analogy, or what is called ijtihad qiyasi. They would do what they call ijtihad jama'i, where they look at the consensus that existed before. There are very few topics on which there is what you would call true absolute consensus. It is usually easy to find consensus on topics that the Quran is already clear on, topics the Sunnah is already clear on. So we pray 5 times a day. There's a consensus there. Why? Because the hadith that are mutawatir, the Quran, they're all clear on this issue, and it's nothing contemporary about it. When it comes to ijma as a source of Sharia, it's usually put under the secondary sources of Sharia, because Muslim scholars have classified where we get our guidance from into the primary sources, Quran and Sunnah, and then secondary sources, which are usually tools of ijtihad, such as qiyas, ijma, maslaha, amal of Madina, istihsan, and a number of other slightly more technical tools. Something there's a general consensus over, and the consensus is because you've got clear statements in the Quran, are some of those fundamental daruriyat, the fundamental necessities that are among the objectives or maqasid of Sharia. So every Muslim agrees we should stand for justice. Every Muslim agrees life should be saved and protected and enhanced. Every Muslim agrees the human intellect should be developed through education. And the Prophet said the search for knowledge is compulsory. All Muslims believe that we should protect ourselves from narcotics and intoxicants. All Muslims believe family is an important institution and should be protected and enhanced and facilitated. So what we find is there are those objectives of Sharia that the Quran and Sunnah is already clear about, and so Muslim scholars have had a consensus over these issues. Then there are those fundamental issues of our Aqidah, our creed, that there's nothing new about them. Just like the maqasid, there's nothing new about them. You can develop new objectives as you change contexts. You can see new applications of justice, but justice as a concept and as an objective is not new. When we look therefore at our Aqidah, the fundamental articles of faith that we have that make you a Muslim are clear. When we look at our ibadah, our 5 pillars, the most important things that you must do, your prayer, your salat, etc., the shahada, these are all areas of consensus. Why? Because it's clear from the Quran and from the Sunnah and from the practice of the Sahaba that these are fundamental to the deen. They're not contemporary issues. When we look at values of behavior, of kindness, of forgiveness, when we look at all of these are areas of consensus. When we look at certain things that are required to be done in society, provision of security, there are many others, and then certain prohibitions. Alcohol is prohibited, zina is prohibited, etc., etc. The point I'm making is we already have more than enough agreement on the most fundamental issues, that those things that we don't have consensus over should never be a reason for disunity. There was never uniformity, and this is why we should distinguish between unity of the ummah and uniformity of opinions. There's always been difference of opinion. There's nothing new about that. And we will always have difference of opinion, or what they call khilaf. And they had the adab of ikhtilaf. They had ethics of disagreement, of handling those issues so that we don't blow them out of proportion such that they undermine the areas on which we all agree. In other words, what we have in common, what there's already an ijma over, is much wider, more important, more relevant than the issues we disunite over.